So I did a BA in PE with honours, not a BEd at the time because I didn't know whether I wanted to focus in PE or sports development, which was just becoming a phrase at that time. So yeah, I did a BA for 4 years, then became a sabbatical sports officer at Warwick, which was phenomenal, and got involved with all the British universities and international sport through FISU. And then from then I went into sports development really. But I think my first ever proper job, if you like, in the sector was a recreation assistant at Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council, BMBC. And I recall cleaning the showers in that sports hall, changing rooms, both male and female showers. And I can tell you now, everybody who starts there, that's where you start, cleaning the showers and the coffee machine. And sometimes you can make it through the system.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Lisa Wainwright, CEO of Sport and Recreation Alliance. Lisa has worked at the heart of sports development and administration for over 25 years. Following her successful career working across Sport England, netball, basketball and volleyball governing bodies, she has affectionately picked up the tag, the woman who works with balls. During this episode, we discuss Lisa's journey to leading SRA, her leadership philosophies and life as a CEO. Enjoy the show. I'm excited to welcome Lisa Wainwright, CEO of Sport and Recreation Alliance. The Alliance works with over 320 diverse partner members, and they are the voice of the sector to government, policymakers and the media. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you, James. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we sorted out all the planning issues and missed each other a couple of times, but we're here now, so I'm really excited to get into it. And where we generally start, and a lot of people in the sector will know of you already, but just for those who don't, try and start listeners getting to know you a little bit better. So we'll go all the way back and talk about your childhood really. So born and raised in, was it Royston?
Yeah, born and raised in Royston, in the Yorkshire Royston. There's a couple of other Roystons. Very proud daughter to a miner, my dad, and kind of always got involved in sport, from athletics to netball, basketball, badminton, any sport I always had a go at. Working class family. I had a tough time during the miners' strike in '84 and stuff, but absolutely loved my childhood, though we had some tough times, as I say. And it was through a PE teacher. She said to me, if you don't do your homework, Lisa, you're not playing netball. So I did my homework, and lo and behold, I got to play netball. And from then on, I managed to get those O-levels that I think are called GCSEs now.
Was that your first love then, netball, if you got back then in terms of sports?
I really loved netball and played from junior school. I started quite early and then played through senior and counties and regionals and all the things. And I absolutely loved it. And I also did javelin at the same time, so I was quite inspired by some of your listeners. I hope will remember Daley Thompson, and Daley came to our school as part of one of the Olympics programs, and he inspired me at the time, and I took up actually javelin and then followed Fatima and Tessa and Tina Lilac from Finland and others. So I did both sports, but I preferred netball from a social point of view. But as I say, I kind of tried them all. So it was that teacher who took me kind of under her wing, I guess. And from then, as I said, I got these O-levels, GCSEs, A-levels. And before I knew it, I was at university and wanted to be a PE teacher so that I could do what she'd done to me and got me out of a Yorkshire mining village where none of the family had been to university. My dad thought it was bonkers.
I was going to say, what was that like? Because I guess it's a bit of a difference to, obviously, miners, really hard working, obviously. But looking at a career as a teacher, is that a step away from kind of generations before you going to university?
Without a doubt, none of the Wainwrights had been to university, and my dad thought I was bonkers. He'd retired from mining and worked at Lyons Bakery, as did my brother and my mum. And he just couldn't understand why I didn't want to work in the factory. And part of it was wanting to get away from my family. When you get to 18, you realise, you're slightly different, want to get away. And the other thing was I'd seen through my teacher, Pat Green, that people can change people's lives, and I wanted a little piece of that, and I thought being a teacher was exactly that. So that's kind of the background that I went to Warwick University.
So you were at Warwick, and that was PE teaching, you're studying there, because I know you went on, was that masters and things at the time, or was it kind of straight?
Yeah, so I did a BA in PE with honours, not a BEd at the time because I didn't know whether I wanted to focus in PE or sports development, which was just becoming a phrase at that time. So yeah, I did a BA. for 4 years, then became a sabbatical sports officer at Warwick, which was phenomenal, and got involved with all the British universities and international sport through FISU. And then from then I went into sports development, really. But I think my first ever proper job, if you like, in the sector was a recreation assistant at Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council, BMBC. And I recall cleaning the showers in that sports hall, changing rooms, both male and female showers. And I could tell you now, everybody who starts there, that's where you start, cleaning the showers and the coffee machine. And sometimes you can make it through the system.
You know what? This is really funny. You're taking me back, because I did something similar when I was when I was at university. I had the same job, leisure assistant in Cardiff, a place called the Star Centre. So I remember cleaning the showers and changing rooms and doing the badminton changeovers, etc. Yeah, it's taking me back there.
Yeah, trying to get them out as quickly as you possibly can and then get them back in clothes. I remember it well.
Yeah. So your training then, it was, I guess, were you kind of keeping your options open, or was it, thinking about teaching, but then something else came along, or you just fell in love with the kind of sport development stuff at the time? Did you ever go into teaching or did you just qualify? Did you ever have placement in school?
I qualified and then didn't go into it because one of my friends came into my office when I was sabbatical sports officer and said, "There's a perfect job for you, called an East Region Netball Development Officer." I didn't even know what that meant in those days. I was a netballer, I love netball, as we just talked through. And so I applied and I got it. So because it was just wrapped into where I was teaching, there was a little bit of male domination, if you like, in heads of departments in PE at that time. And I thought, do I really want to be hassled with kind of, working through that? Or can I go to something that's completely new in this development world? So I took that decision and never really looked back. I guess I miss a little bit of the hands-on teaching, but for many years when I was younger, I kept on coaching in a variety of different sports. So every holiday I continued to coach different sports. So I'd still got that connection. So that was the decision, was actually I could probably work in a school and impact on a handful of people in each class, or I could work in a governing body and work my way through to a policy level which would impact a lot more people. And that's what I decided to do.
Yeah, I will probably get onto it later on, but just when you touch on that, we said a bit male dominated in the PE kind of heads of department world, and maybe a bit of a glass ceiling at that stage for you if you were going to PE. What was it that, because it was a new job role and kind of sport development was just starting, do you think that it didn't have the male dominated stigma already? Is that a chance where you could come in and as a leader at that time, or maybe I'm getting the wrong end of the stick and it did become that, but just interested to see what it was at that time.
I don't think it's necessarily become that, but at the time it was really clear that the schools I'd been in, there was a particular way of working, whereas when I'd been at university and worked with the different sports, I obviously got close connections with a whole different bunch of people at England Netball. I just felt that environment at that time was a safer environment for me and a more encouraging environment. The chief exec was female, the senior executives were female, a lot of the board were female, and I don't think I put a deliberate decision. It just felt the right environment.
Like subconsciously felt, this is the right place to be. Yeah. And then in terms of, your career, in terms of looking at, we were talking about it before we started recording, career from there kind of took off and going through loads of different sports and working at a high level across sport in England. What was, I guess, in terms of that journey and the path you started from uni and gone into netball, where did you go from there? Was it swimming after that? I'm just going to try and...
I started
Sport England, right?
Netball development job, then went to Sport England in their governing body team. So working with national governing bodies of sport, loved it. Great breeding ground in terms of knowledge and connections and networks. And I absolutely loved it. So I did that for a few years. Then I went back to England Netball as a director in a different area of the company. And then Sport England asked me to go back through all due process and interviews to be head of volunteering. So I did that before becoming head of sport. And I absolutely loved all those roles, but it was just moving up a different management level each time I was in them. And again, I had a team of people that worked with me through those different roles. And just, I loved working with people. And I guess that's the teaching element. And you asked about the degree. I did a master's in learning and teaching. So for me, all the roles I've had is about developing people to be better through sport. It's always the same, regardless of netball, basketball, volleyball, international, local, charity, or whatever it is. It's always the same ethos.
That's the theme. Yeah, you said Sport England House, you became head of Sport England. Looking at the stats and kind of the budget you were controlling at the time, things like that must have been quite an opportunity to impact across the country. Is there any kind of highlights or milestones you got from that time you could share?
Yeah, again, some of your listeners will remember it was a very, very different time. Sport England had just brought in the new delivery system as a set of terminology. So there'd be a national stream of funding, which is where I sat, and then the local stream of funding that went through the old active partnerships, CSPs, etc. People, again, will remember the terminology. And what I wanted to do is to make sure that, in my view, a lot of these sports that really hadn't had investment had an opportunity. So persuaded the executive that we would develop something called a building capacity fund. and a lot of sports access building capacity funding, which was some of the first monies some of them had, which is now known as core funding. And at the same time, and it took quite a long time to do this, there was the club coach development program, which is about moving talented coaches more through the system. And it was a joint piece of work regionally and nationally. It's quite complex, but that supported thousands and thousands of coaches on their own talent pathway.
And this is, so we're looking at, it's like mid-2000s, right? And this was happening, right?
Yeah.
I'm really interested to know how far we've travelled, if that makes sense. So from the start of your career in sports development to now, what do you think the major changes are, the major developments, hopefully, from then to now? Or do we still have the same challenges?
People are people, and I think there are still many challenges and many more challenges as society has changed. I just look at my two girls who are 8 and 9, trying to get them off their iPad is not the easiest task on earth. I think I could probably visit the Queen and have lunch easier than getting them off their iPads. But I think a lot of things have changed in terms of investment into the sector, from the sector. It's not in terms of local authority funding. That has definitely been reduced, and more recently for obvious reasons. And there needs to be a significant drive to increase the amount of investment into local authority facilities in particular and provision. But I think the challenge for me is that we saw, 20, 30 years ago, a huge birth of the sports development sector, majority of which were through local authorities and a couple through governing bodies. There's now a significant number in governing bodies that are highly funded or commercially operating, and hardly any in local authorities because of those cuts. So there's been a real shift in the workforce. But I think over those, 20 plus years, we've professionalised as a sector. SIMSPA is obviously has now been launched through a combination of other previous bodies, and the profession has got chartered status. A lot more people are aware of the profession, would look to come into the profession as such. But there are still many, many challenges if you just look at the active people stats in terms of, the diversity of people who are taking part in sport and physical activity. We've not cracked it. And I think the new strategy from Sport England is starting to do that. But you can't do it on the budgets that we're operating off. It is near on impossible. But I think for me, we've still got a long way to go around prevention. And hopefully through the last year or so, people have started to understand about the importance of physical and mental health. We hear it all the time, and it's time for us, and part of what the Alliance does is work with government to identify areas that we can cross different departments to provide solutions, rather than solutions being provided to the sector that quite honestly are not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, touched on the Alliance, there's probably a good time to have a look at the genesis of that, and we'll talk about how you got involved. But are you able to give us a little bit of a, potted history of the Sport and Recreation Alliance in terms of how it came about, how it was formed, and what it does at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So the CCPR, the Central Council of Physical and Recreation, was formed a long time ago prior to the Sports Council. So it was the original Sports Council, if you like. And at the time, we owned the national facilities. So Plassey Brennan, Hull Pierpont, Lillishall, Bisham and others. And when the government at the time decided to form a formal sports council, so the English Sports Council, we bequeathed our facilities to the then English Sports Council. So since then, we've had a relationship with Sport England where we get in perpetuity funding for the gift of those facilities. So we're slightly different to governing bodies, that we get an award for administration costs. And we're a member body, we always have been. We started out, majority of our members were national governing bodies of sport. So Rugby Football Union, the ECB, boccia, basketball, all those, the whole variety of sports. And then gradually, as the sectors slightly change with different organisations coming through, like the Active Partnerships, like the Sport for Development Coalition movement and others, it's slightly broadened. So we're slightly broadened now. The core membership is around the NGBs.
Yeah, and I guess that, like you said before, in terms of that highlight on sport and physical activity or mental health and well-being that we've seen at the moment, that probably fits well with how you broadened your membership, right? You go from classic sports governing bodies and into kind of caravanning and classic recreation things there. What was that like in terms of having such a diverse membership to kind of, communicate and make sure everyone's on the same, bring everyone together?
It's brilliant. I mean, it's so diverse. You can learn across each other. I mean, it's busy, don't get me wrong, and particularly during the COVID period, we were exceptionally busy because every organisation clearly wanted to ensure that their sport and recreational activity could stay open or be open sooner than any other. So it was such a busy time, and we supported all our members as much as we could at that period. But there's a wealth of knowledge, and I think for me, we work across divisions. There's movement and dance division, the outdoor pursuits division, etc., major spectator sports and games and sports. So we work within divisions who have chairs and secretariats, and we get themes coming through and across them. So a number of them might be about access to outdoor recreation, which has just been in the news today about the government looking to increase access. And that might come across one or two divisions that we then work through the APPG for Sport, the all-party parliamentary group, to try and persuade MPs that this is a significant issue across the sector. So it's diverse, but I love it. If it gets you out, if it gets you active, and if it gets you happy, then you're part of the SRA as far as I'm concerned.
In terms of I guess what drew you to the role, like you explained it there, but in that journey from when you first started, what was it that attracted you initially to get involved with them and take up the CEO position?
Yeah, so from Sport England to the SRA, I was chief exec at Volleyball England for 8.5 years, and I was also then after that chief exec of British Basketball for a couple of years, and voluntarily did a couple of roles. I was senior independent director at Swim England, the old ASA, and chair of the Institute of Swimming. So I'd got a real diversity, if you like, of sports that I'd worked with.
It's almost tailor-made when I'm looking at that.
And that was it. I wasn't really looking for the job, and I've known the CCPR for years and really supported them and been on training programs and courses and everything else. And then the job came up and somebody phoned me and said, Wainwright, would you apply for this? And I just thought, this is a perfect job with my background in terms of Sport England and the relationship with Sport England and the SRA, being a chief exec of a number of sports, having worked internationally and taking on some roles locally. It just felt the right job, and the last 2 years I've just absolutely loved. I've got so much more to do and unbelievable amounts to do, but I love working with our members and just remember to think in their shoes, really. You've got to remember what it's like being in that national governing body.
So I know you've got a new strategy for, is it 21 to 25? Is that launched already? Is that been launched already?
Yep. Yes, that's been launched. It's called the SRA. Very simple. That's me. Support, recover and achieve. It's easy to remember. And we're looking at kind of 4 objectives within there. One is what we are known to do in terms of championing the economic, social health and wellbeing aspects of and benefits of sport and recreation. And then the second one, as you'd expect from a membership organisation, is to promote and protect all our members. And then the last 2 are new. One is around ensuring that we can provide support and leadership on sustainability, which a whole host of our members have asked for. And the final one is around supporting and leading our members to be more diverse, which again I alluded to a little earlier, from a whole perspective of diversity. So those are the 2 new objectives that we're now focused on.
Yeah, in terms of one question we always ask is more of an operations one, really. So in terms of your role and leading the organisation, it might go back to when you're in other roles, but what are the kind of main recurring challenges you have? I know we've covered a huge one, and everyone knows about that one, but in terms of just day-to-day, same trends or challenges always coming up, the same type of thing. What are they for you?
The challenge for me is, because I'm always so optimistic about what we can deliver and want to do more, is just having the resource to be able to do it. We don't have massive budgets, we don't have a huge staff team. So it's just my ambition for doing more. Personally is always my issue, but I always find a way, believe you me, James, I get there, but that's the issue. But I think for me, I've only been there 2 years, and the first year, 4 days before being appointed, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I had to, although I worked throughout it, and in essence, they'd got a not a full-on CEO. I'm recovered. So I've only really been CEO for a year, but what I did during that period was a huge amount of management and leadership with the team, which I hadn't had a lot about, and also restructured the whole team and ensured that the people who were working for the Alliance had the same values that the Alliance had, that we're working in the same way, and hence the new strategy. So I think in terms of some of the challenges, it's knowing when there's somebody in your team that fits those values and will bring their whole self to the organisation, and it's knowing when somebody's not quite right for the organisation. Doesn't mean to say they're a bad person at all, but it means to say that way of operating, those values are not sitting with that person. So for example, you're not going to earn £1 million working for the Alliance. If you're motivated by money, don't come to us. Our salaries are fine, absolutely fine. Honestly, we've done a benchmark.
That's just the CEO position, right? That one.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Well, that's some of the challenges, is making sure the values of the organisation are lived, not just talked about or written in the strategy. Ambition and having a different vision. So I think for me, part of the SRA's role, but I've always tried to do this in the other organisations I've worked for, was looking differently from different sectors as to how we can operate. And I've always tried to do that. And again, as a CEO, you've got to create time to do that. It's very easy to sit with your inbox, but actually it's important you take time out of the sports sector and look at other areas.
Just on that one about, were you talking about, I guess, defining that culture and knowing if people team are a right fit, and obviously that's going to cascade down through your strategy into the rest of the network. Going back in, it's interesting to think you've gone into these other roles in netball, volleyball, basketball, etc. And I'm assuming you've maybe done some transformational work and restructured and things like that. How do you kind of go about communicating that vision? Of course, it must be a difficult task to implement the new strategy and then transform and communicate that down and make sure everyone's on the same page, get everyone from the old way of working to now, especially when they're so passionate about their sport as well and how they want to approach it?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of organisation you're going into. So when I went into volleyball, I was recruited because the organisation wanted to change. Likewise with the Alliance, I was recruited for specific skills of changing the organisation. So for me, if you've got the backing of the board that are saying we want you to change things, that's great. But as you say, there are thousands and thousands of volleyballers out there that are really happy with the way volleyball is. There's also thousands that aren't happy. If you think about a cricket scenario at the minute, everybody's happy with cricket, and then the 100 comes along. There's a whole new world happy with the
It's
100.
a different sport also, yeah.
Yeah. Same as beach volleyball, sitting volleyball, indoor volleyball. So for me, it was making sure that and I've always done this in every sport I've been in, you roadshow it, you go around the country, you meet those people who coach, who referee or umpire day in, day out, you listen to them. And from what they are telling you, you try to identify what that vision could be. And from that, you start to pull together that strategy in terms of the sport. You then go back and you reiterate and you continue like a broken record to talk about what that vision is and what their role is within it. And that's where success has come. For me, you have to have a success fairly early on if you're going to transform something. It takes years to transform something, but you've got to have some success. And ours at volleyball was this National Volleyball Centre had been talked about for absolute years. And nothing had happened. And within 6 months, we'd launched and opened the National Volleyball Centre, fully funded and operating. So everybody talked about it.
Yeah, and I guess that gives that impression you mean business, you can get things done. So people are more likely to follow.
But you have to take people with you. But, sometimes you can't. And sometimes you have to accept that, from a leadership point of view, you can't please everyone. And I always say, most of us don't like change. I hate change personally being put upon me. I love it in a work environment. And you will always get the naysayers who could go either way, but you will get some people that absolutely adamantly hate what you're doing. And there will be people in volleyball that still will say, shouldn't have had a National Volleyball Centre, shouldn't have done this. Shouldn't have increased the funding by 4 million, shouldn't have done this. That will always be the case. But if the majority are going with you, then that's, for me, the transformation that you need to take.
And in terms of the Alliance, I know you've got the strategy. Where do you see, and I guess plans, I'm assuming, have definitely been curtailed over the last couple of years, what you'd like to have achieved without COVID and other things. But in the next 5 to 10 years, do you have some like markers in the sand that you really want to be achieving? And is that based on kind of growing the membership or certain metrics like that?
Yeah, we're not really focused on growing the membership because there's only so many organisations out there.
Fit,
delighted. We was to keep to the criteria of what our core purpose is. But for us, our mission is about being the go-to body within the sector. So if any, movement and dance organisation, caravan and camping club, outdoor pursuits organisation, if they've got any issue at all, they should think, I'm going to contact the SRA because they can help me. And I likened it, because I'd gone through cancer treatment, to Macmillan. When I was diagnosed, I knew if I went to Macmillan, I got legal support, financial support, counselling, a wig. There was just so much support from Macmillan. And I want the SRA in 10 years' time for anybody in the sector to know if they've got a question, they can come to us. We might provide the service, we might link you to a service, or we might have to create a new service depending on what it is. So that's the vision for me for the SRA. And for us to stay in line, James, there's lots of other sector organisations that do brilliant jobs like SIMSPA, as mentioned, UK Active, Sport Talent Coalition, Sport Inhalers, to be really clear what that focus is and not go out of lane. It's a basketball term, but to stay in lane, that's what we're there for. Is for our members. And if there's a request, let's say about sustainability, let's make sure that we work alongside Sport England, alongside UK Active, alongside U Sport Trust, so that we're not crossing those lanes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that kind of open lines of communication and everyone knows like what the best place where that would sit, if that makes sense? Because the major organisations, all the ones you've mentioned, and do you meet regularly and kind of discuss your strategies together so you're not duplicating?
Yeah, we do, and this is one of the real positives of COVID. So I was watching the excitement of a CEO. I was watching the evidence for both the Lords Select Committee on COVID and sport, and I was also watching the DCMS one, and it came to me that we kept saying we wanted a plan. I kept thinking, well, why are we asking government for a plan? Actually, we are the sector. We should know what we need and how we can support the government. So I called a couple of the CEOs up and we formed something called a National Sector Partners Group, an NSPG. So the Local Government Association, LGA, UK Active, as I mentioned, with Hugh, SIMSPA in terms of workforce, U Sport Trust in terms of young people, Sport Talent Coalition, and I hope I've not forgotten anybody. But that group now meets on a fortnightly basis. It's got a soft terms of reference. It's not been formalised, but what we're trying to do is to develop something around a social compact with government to help them understand how sport recreation can have a much bigger role in society around, reducing the burden on the NHS and social care, for example, boosting the green revolution. Sport and recreation plays such a bigger role than it currently does. And actually what was happening, they'd come to individually to us, or we'd be consulted once a year. And actually we met with the minister already, we're meeting with officials next week. And it's not me leading it, it's not Hugh leading it, or Ali or anybody else. It's a collective that we've agreed we will always work together in this approach, with key messages to government and from government, with asks of them, but also commitments back to them. So that's been a massive change. It's not happened before. And I have to say, from my perspective, it's working far better than I thought it would.
Yeah, I guess that makes it so much more powerful, like the commitment. I just, they're meeting every 2 weeks. I was expecting you to say, we meet every 6 months or something like that. But yeah, it's really like you're actively pushing the agenda forward. So that's really positive for
I think there's so much change, and it changes very quickly. That's why as leaders, we need to be thinking well ahead of those changes coming and preparing for them. So it wouldn't have done a month, because things change so quickly in this climate. So usually on a Friday afternoon, we touch base, a little bit of soft counselling as well as CEOs, but predominantly to make sure we're on the ball.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of your movement, like a bit more personal, in terms of your like business philosophies, things like that, you might have developed over the time, and you dropped some gems already as we've been talking. But in terms of your approach to being a leader, I know resilience is a key word in there. But have you got anything that you've kind of picked up or developed over your time across all the different organisations you've worked in?
Yeah, I mean, my basic one is everybody comes to work to do a good job. And they do. You don't wake up and go, I'm going to balls up the IT system today, and I'm going to make sure that coach can't coach and that kid can't compete. Nobody ever says that. Everybody comes to work to do a good job, and it's my role to enable them to do the best job they can do. And if they balls up, it's my fault, not theirs. So I keep that really firmly in place, that's the basis of what they do. And everybody wants to learn. They just learn in different ways. So that's kind of a basic. In terms of resilience, as a saying, I'll always say, when you get to the end of a rope, tie a knot and hang on. And I've had to do that so many times, because believe you me, I've had some rough times in some of the sports I've worked with. Just, there's not been funding available. For example, basketball had no money when I went to it. Volleyball was one of the smallest sports, and we grew it. Working internationally, in a couple of sports on a number of different committees, you just meet some very different challenges. So having that knot at the end of the rope and seriously just hanging and waiting, and then gradually you move forwards. And the other thing I think is around, in terms of working with people as a leader, I'm not worried that I don't know. People find this a bit odd, but volleyball, I wasn't a volleyballer. I hadn't got any technical knowledge, but that's why they wanted me, because the sport's got all the technical knowledge. And I often go into environments where I don't have that knowledge. It's about ensuring the people around you have, and again, facilitating the environment to allow them to grow, basically blossom. So for me, some of the things around acknowledging individuals, recognizing that difference. Nobody has a weakness, everybody has strengths, and focus on the strengths. Don't try and develop the weaknesses, there's no point. Somebody else will fill that. I'm absolutely appalled. I'm crap at finance. I'm absolutely hopeless, but I make absolutely sure I've got people around me who are phenomenal at it. And, don't get me wrong, I've done finance training galore, but I'm still happier doing visionary, strategic, networking, influencing work. And then the other part is about empowering people. I guess that's the teaching part, but I'm not worried if I'm not chairing a meeting. I'm not worried if I'm not on the TV. It's about the organisation's outcomes that's the most important to me. And I think that's pretty key, and leaders are very different, but for me, I'd rather be in the background. I'll let the staff talk about what they're doing, and then the team, talk about the outcomes of what they've delivered. And everything we deliver, it might be through a little seed of a vision that I might have had, but ordinarily it's not. It's somebody in the team that comes up with the idea.
Yeah, and you picked it together and brought it all into that strategy to make it successful. No, I picked on that point in terms of not needing to know everything. It's definitely a key one that a lot of people fall into the trap of trying to improve their skills in areas they shouldn't.
It was I'll give you a classic example. So we've got quite a traditional board, and they're a great board, absolutely, totally, in terms of their expertise. And I said to the board, there's, we need to do a new strategy. I said, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be involved in the process. And my chairman, who's a brilliant chairman, but very traditional, went, I'm sorry? I said, no, I've just spent 18 months putting all my managers through a management and leadership program with brilliant facilitators, all immersive learning. I said, I have confidence that the managers will be able to do a better job than I can. I said, just take the risk with me. And he twitched and went, what? And we did. And the managers led the whole process, and I didn't come in till right at the end when it was presented to the board. And that's the strategy that we have, and I think it's the best strategy we've ever had. But it's empowering. They now own it, they understand it, they've developed it, working with our members. Now, what's better than them doing that? And he just smirked at me and said, it's a good strategy, isn't it? I said, well, I told you they'd do better than me, because day to day they're delivering, they're working with the members. I don't get as hands-on as they do, but there's not many chief execs I think would probably say, off you go, do the whole strategy.
Our team's developed. No, it is progressive. I think, how hard was it for you when you came in right at the end? How hard was it to not add anything to it or amend it at that point?
Clearly I checked and challenged them and said, have you thought about this, have you thought about that? But actually they'd done that to themselves, and through this training program they understood each other very, very well in terms of how we developed them. So the check and challenge had already happened between the managers and the senior managers, so it didn't take a lot. It was a little bit of 30 odd years of wisdom that I just asked a few questions, but I didn't change much in the end. Again, I didn't need to.
And I guess that's obviously that's a testament to your recruitment as well, building that team or assembling that team. But also, I'm assuming that was successfully implemented because all the people who were implementing it created it. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But you'd think about, in theory, it would be more successful.
We'll see, because it's only the first year, James. So I might, if I lose on it's not the best.
I'll talk to you in 5 years. I'll talk to you in 3 years' time. See how we went on.
Yeah.
So, a couple of questions with me. Obviously, we're interested in data. We're a software company. We come from a data angle. How important do you think that's becoming in the industry from when you started to now? And do you use data to drive your? I'm assuming you do, to drive your decisions and things like that. And the sectors, because of the way, obviously because of the nature of it, it's difficult to get. Everyone's not sitting behind the desk and working. So implementing systems and things like that can be hard. So what's your kind of take on that from the SRA's angle?
Yeah, I mean, from our angle, we were part of the open data project with Sport England when it first initiated. And to be fair, I'm not quite sure of the progress of how many NGBs are now working on that in terms of opening up their data. I think if you talk about the last 20 years, the need for data has significantly increased. The need for insight from that data has significantly increased. We've just developed a new research and development arm within the Alliance with a group of staff to provide that service to our members. And again, within a number of our members, they've got R&D teams to ensure that they've got enough information to inform their strategies. But I still think we don't put enough investment into it, because I'm not so sure. I'm talking mid-range governing bodies here. I'm not talking, the footballs and the crickets and rugbies. But I think there's a number of mid-range governing bodies and partners that don't necessarily have the investment to put into systems that then give them the information, nor then the time to interrogate that information to put into practice.
Yeah, understood. Touched on it earlier on, but being on a board, going back to mid-90s and sitting on the board as a woman, I know you work with other organisations and you've got ties in there, but I'm really interested to hear your take on, obviously, one of the pillars of the strategy being diversity. How's that changing? What's that like from a board level in terms of having a more diverse board across all the organisations? But just interested to take your take on it with your experience and past experience on so many different organisations. You've got great insight.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously I started out in netball, very female orientated, then moved to Sport England, which was very aware of diversity. Sheila Moreau was my first boss with then Dr. Anita White. So until I moved into national governing bodies, I didn't really hit any issues in relation to women on boards. And I guess my first experience was at swimming. I was the only female on the swimming board to start off with. I have to say I had no issues whatsoever. I was just very visibly the only woman around the table. But they were a very inclusive board, led by Edward Lord at the time, great diversity strategy, etc. Volleyball, we had 3 female board members, and basketball similarly to meet the governance code. So things had changed in the latter part because the governance code had come in. If you were funded, you had to have a percentage of women on your board, 30% at the time. So things had changed and that stick approach had worked.
Yeah, do you think that's a good approach then in terms of the quota, that kind of quota approach? Do you feel like, obviously it works on paper because everyone has to do it, but is I guess the cultural change, does it support that?
I think it has worked, but I think it's too simplistic. There are many other characteristics that are not represented around a board. For example, how many people from a Yorkshire mining town would be sat on a board of that level? Not many, I can tell you. And my accent it becomes broader as people talk more public school, just because I can. But I think for me, we need to look at intersectional issues now, rather than we're going to have 30% of people from minority diversity backgrounds, 30% women, 30% this. It's just not, for me, it's about life experience. And that's what will bring real depth to boards going forwards. But there are still I mean, the fact that the sports councils did put that into the governance code, there was an absolute shift. And when I've worked internationally, the experience is very, very different as a woman in terms of how the gentleman will treat you as a lady, for example, and you are assumed to be going on the spouses tour rather than actually being at the international conference. so I think it was required. It made a shift. Do I think it's the way to move forwards? No, I don't. I think that we've changed as a sector. And I want to see a more intersectional approach to how boards are governed, and the senior management team within organisations are grown as well. Because for me, it's a combination of both an executive and a non-executive mixture in terms of diversity and inclusion.
I love that. In terms of another personal question, in terms of your routine, like daily routine, I guess it changes all the time, but do you have anything in terms of staying that helps you to stay performing at your best? Do you put anything in place? Are you meditating, yoga, exercise? What is it that you have? And I guess, how does a day in the life of the CEO look for yourself?
So basically, James, in the morning, I'm really grumpy because my kids get me up at 6 o'clock and I'm just like, oh, just leave me alone.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah.
But I do have a routine. I mean, the first thing I do is look at all the social media. So I get all the social media, the LinkedIn stuff, the Twitter stuff, Facebook stuff. I clear all that in my head. So it's as though you would ordinarily sit down and read a newspaper. That is my update, as well as seeing the news first thing, because we obviously respond to a lot of
that's like your daily brief. Yeah, your daily briefing, morning briefing.
First thing, exactly. My daily briefing is my first thing. I then come down to my office and got in the garden because I'm working from home, and I do 30 minutes on my bike, which is then looking at, again, continuing to see all the media and deciding what we might respond to and what we might not respond to. Then it's kind of looking at emails, but majority of which is then putting your time between external work, internal work, and keeping your pulse to stay on broader external work, as in not alliance, but then broader. What opportunities am I linking into that's not connected to sport that could give me a different angle? So it might well be international LGBTQI work, for example, that I might be speaking at a conference or attending a conference virtually to learn. And I've always, on my career, I've tried to have one day that's a my day, because I've always found, you're too busy answering emails and always being there for people, and you can't create that thinking time. So as I say, I've always tried to have one lighter day that sounds crazy. You might be doing your shopping, but you don't turn off being a CEO. Yeah. You just think it. And I always say, how does Sainsbury's know that I eat Yoplait yogurts and send me a voucher? Why can't ECB know that I want to play cricket and send me a voucher next week? It's kind of those. You
get those ideas just popping up from being a different.
Yeah. Exactly. And we'll try that, and we'll try this. So that's the other thing I've tried to do. And then finally, in terms of some of the more senior roles, I've always had a personal boardroom, which some of your members might have heard of. Dr. Zelda King is famous for inventing this, which is a group of people that I will use at different times, whether they're a mentor, a coach, an anchor. So if I'm struggling, my confidence has gone, I've got a real challenge, I'll go to my anchor and I'll say, Wainwright, you've done this before, you're cool, you're great, you can deliver it, let's go through it again. It might be a challenger when I'm cruising and I've just got up at 10 o'clock and I've only got one meeting. And my challenger will say, that's not the role of CEO, Lisa. So there's a whole group of 12 people within this personal boardroom that I will utilize at different times depending on what I need at that time. So it's much broader than a mentor and a coach. It's very specific in terms of their skill sets and how they support me. And I found that in both leadership and board positions incredibly useful. I had to do an awful task in one of the boards. I was petrified. And the anchor at the time that I was working with just said, right, sit there, we're going to role play it. And it sounds really silly, but role playing it took me through it and made it so much easier because I'd already practiced it, which in sport you always practice before you do it. But to practice before you go into a boardroom and physically sit in a boardroom and practice it just seemed odd, but it works. So as I say, now I have this personal boardroom that helps me hopefully keep on track, she says.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that's the thing. Why would you expect to be able to just walk in and do something without rehearsing it beforehand? It's like, but to give yourself all that anxiety, just do something off the cuff and that. And I love that personal boardroom, I guess, that approach. And it was, did you say it was Zelda King, right?
Dr. Zelda King, yeah.
Dr. Zelda King, yeah. We'll definitely link that into the show notes for any of the listeners to want to dive into that a bit more. Last question from me, and it's a bit of a reflective one. If you could go back to when you started your career, so when you, I guess, leaving university, etc., if you could go back and give yourself any advice to your younger self, you jump in a time machine and go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I've really enjoyed it. I love my career. I love all the variety I've had. So I think actually a good point. So I'm a lesbian. I have a wife. I have 2 children through IVF. And I've always been out. So I came out at university and I've always been out, but I've never spoken until the last 5 years. I've never spoken on a public platform because I didn't want to be known as Lisa the lesbian. I want to be known as Lisa Lisa.
For all of you, yeah, exactly.
I
But
just
yeah,
want
for you, who you are, yeah.
So, but then I thought, actually, if people hadn't spoken for the years and years and years, Ed, Billie Jean King, Martina, and others, I wouldn't have the lifestyle that I have. So I took a decision 4 or 5 years ago that I would start to speak on a public platform and support, Stonewall, Pride Sport, others, and international stuff. So I guess I would have said to myself in my earlier years, you're out, you're safe, your family know you are, you've got all the support you possibly need. Start to do a bit more role modeling, a bit more publicly. Would probably be the advice I'd have done to help more people.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm assuming now you're getting a lot more. You get feedback. You're going to hear how people are using you as a role model, like you said, with others like Billie Jean King, etc. Yeah, seeing yourself in those positions or seeing someone like yourself is always good for people starting out in their career.
Feedback couldn't have been any better. I had a phone call from somebody who was at a national police conference who phoned me to say, your name's just been mentioned by a GB sitting volleyballer. The reason she joined, she was disabled. The reason she joined sitting volleyball was because you were a lesbian, and she is, and that's why she wanted to be in your sport, because it was a welcoming sport. Now, I didn't know she was saying that, but somebody phoned me, my wife's in the police, and said, this is what's happened. And I thought, it doesn't matter what happens in life, if you can do that for somebody and they feel safe in that environment, that's brilliant.
Definitely.
And that's Claire Harvey, who's a phenomenal Paralympian, and I'm sure will be yelling her head off at the minute watching the games.
I guess you got a bit of a claim on that, some of that Olympic success as well.
Not a lot.
Little question, in terms of the job you're doing at the moment, a lot of policy work and working with government, etc. Have you ever thought about maybe in the future moving over to the other side and get into government?
I have thought about it, but I've got a very dodgy past personally, so I probably would do really well in government now. I don't know. I have thought about it, but I really love being a CEO. I love developing people and being a CEO. Not necessarily the CEO bit, but I just love developing people. And I'm not convinced as an MP you would get to make a difference. I would hope you'd get to make a difference, but I'm not sure I'd be able to develop people as much as I do. But I do get an inclination to drive a policy change, and I could see that as really exciting. But again, from Yorkshire, without the magic of anything but my degrees, my masters and honorary PhD, I kind of look at it and think I couldn't cope with that bunch. And then I think, Wainwright, that's why you should go into it. But no, I'm happy where I am, really happy.
Yeah, that was good. Lisa, thank you so much for giving up all your time with me this afternoon. And great episode and loads of insights in there. So we will link everything into the show notes that we've discussed. But just want to say thanks for your time.
No problem. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.